I am Dr. Eli Camp. Welcome. This is my podcast, Vital Wisdom. And this is where I talk about health, wellness, homesteading, raising children, and lots of other topics, all from the perspective of vitalism. I believe I've seen and taught others how the body can heal itself if it's given what it needs, it's not poisoned, and the innate healing ability of the body has been supported, not suppressed. It is my intention to bring what I have learned in my life, especially the last 24 years of being a physician, to help you be your own best doctor. Hope you enjoy the episodes, and thanks for being here. Hey, everybody. Dr. Eli Camp here, and this is my podcast, Vital Wisdom, where we are always talking about how the body can self-heal from a simple scratch or cut that you keep clean. The body just has that innate healing ability within it. So we know that when we give our body what it needs to thrive, nutrients, sleep, community, exercise, good, healthy, positive thinking, a number of things. When we give our body what it needs and we remove anything that's poisoning it, toxic food, toxic drink, toxic air, toxic people, when we make sure that our detoxification systems, also known as the emunctory system, are open and flowing, and we're having bowel movements and urinating and sweating, and our lymph is moving, things like that. So when we remove what's poisoning it, basically, we address the health of our blood and lymph and make sure it's clean and it's nourishing and not toxifying to our body. And we stimulate the already built-in healing mechanisms, which the body tells you when it's doing that. It has a fever, it's trying to heal. It is itching and around a cut or a wound, it's healing. Like, you know, we assist the body in what it attempts to do every day, all the time, of healing itself. Then what you get, you have all those ingredients, is a body that can heal itself. And ironically enough, I was talking with my webmaster years ago, and we came up with this very clear idea that most people don't seem to realize. And that is, there's a point for all humans when you are healthy enough. Now, this might not be your optimal level of health. It might not be the level of health of a marathon runner or the super healthy, health nut guru. But you reach a point where you're healthy enough that you no longer have symptoms of illness. Because he asked me, are you always trying to get people to their 100% healthiest? And I told him, I said, that's great. And if we can get people to their 100% healthiest state, man, I'm all about that. But in today's day and age, and given how busy people are, and the fact that some people walk with one foot in my world of medicine and one foot in mainstream medicine, and just there's so many factors that go into it that I don't think many people reach their 100% level of optimal health. But back from that, down the sort of spectrum, there is a place where we can be healthy enough that we can live long, high quality lives, symptom-free, functioning better than we've ever functioned before. And I think of that place as, you're healthy enough. Keep doing this. You can get healthier with more effort in and more things to do. Why Why am I belaboring this point? Well, and I know I talk about it on every episode, but today's episode is about something called homeoprophylaxis. And I get asked about this a lot. In my world, the majority of folks around me and talking to me and asking me to speak and asking me to be their doctor are folks who have made the decision to not vaccinate themselves, their children, their families, and they will tell everyone who will listen why they think that's a bad idea. And some of those people used to be very strong believers in vaccination. I have a number of doctors and nurses and pharmaceutical reps who were firmly standing in that belief that vaccination has saved humankind, which is a falsity. And it doesn't take much thinking or digging to realize that that was a falsity fed to us. I mean, how long, just look at the very basic picture of how long humans have been on the planet and how long vaccinations have been part of that. If that was what was needed to save humankind, we would have never made it to this day and era, ever. Like, we would have died thousands of years ago. So just that in and of itself should give everybody pause, right? And I'm not going in, this is not a pro or anti-vaccination episode at all. This episode is for people who, for whatever reason and however your journey got you to the place of believing that there's something else other than injecting yourself and your children with substances. And there was a time not very long ago where that was 4 or 5 vaccinations. Now it is absurd, the number of injections and at the ages that they want to give them. Autoimmune disease, autism, and so many cancers, so many other things are on the rise that at some point, I hope some really smart people stop and say, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing differently now in medicine than we used to do? And what could be the cause of this? In addition to our environment and where we eat and where we live and all of that stuff, vaccinations surely play a role. So this episode and the topic of homeoprophylaxis is for those people who have made that decision, regardless of where you used to be. You've made that decision that you're not going to do this anymore. You're not going to inject what you perceive, and I believe this too, as a poison into a body where there are so many other options and other places around the world that have embraced these practices. So many doctors around the world who use these alternatives, and the rates of complications from childhood illness or even other infectious illnesses are very low. And the side effects and long-term effects that we can see from vaccinating are simply not present. And what is it? So first off, let's start with Dr. Samuel Hahnemann and a few thoughts that he gave us. Now, if you don't know about homeopathy, I have lots of recordings you can get at my website, ecampnd.com, about the basics of homeopathy. Most of them are free. I do sell courses and things like that there, but they're for people who have said, wow, okay, I understand the basics, but I'd really like to learn how to use this for my family, or I'm a physician and I'd like to be able to offer this to my patients. So I offer learning opportunities. I have a training program, but I also offer a lot of just free education that can get you up to this basic speed and get you using homeopathy even on a first aid and for acute issues at home or with your patients, right? I do that because it is one of the safest, most effective therapies we have as physicians. And I and hundreds of thousands of other practitioners have committed to keeping this alive, keeping this knowledge being disseminated out into the world to practitioners and to people. So Hahnemann, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, was the father of homeopathy. Now, I'm going to tell you that there are many other physicians and many other writings and many other thoughts that sort of discuss this key concept that is embedded in homeopathy, sort of the way we can observe that it works and how to use it before Hahnemann. A simple example is the Egyptians using warm clay mud with someone whose temperature was elevated, and it assisted the body in what it was doing, and it would clear the fever. Fever would rise, it would break, and then the person would recover. Kind of along those lines, and lots of other mentions. There's even mentions of it in the Bible, although they didn't call it homeopathy. One story in particular was about a king and his son, and the son decided he would poison his father so he could ascend to leadership more rapidly. And the father suffered from a condition that we could think of as gout today. It wasn't called that then. And he gave him very, very, very small doses of arsenic, like really teeny tiny, like a grain. Not enough to poison him to where he would seem to be poisoned. But in the case of this father and son, the guy actually needed this. So if we think in the world of homeopathy, we know that you give a substance to someone who's healthy and they exhibit symptoms, and the substance has been diluted and potentized over time. For those of you who are familiar with homeopathy, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who aren't, spend a couple hours learning about it, and you'll know, and then come back and listen to this, and it'll make more sense. But so in homeopathy, we take these potentized substances, we give them to someone healthy. We make a record, create a database of the symptoms that they exhibit, because they do. And there's hundreds of thousands of provers over the history of homeopathy that this has been done with. It's very duplicatable, blah, blah, blah. And we make a note of the symptoms that show up. And then the homeopathic practitioner, when they have a patient who's actually has symptoms of illness, right? They can go to this database and they can say, okay, what remedy was known to produce these symptoms in a healthy person? And they'll select that remedy, give it to the person who has those symptoms. That stimulates the body to heal itself. And it happens over and over and over and over. So that's just kind of like just a little crash course there of what took me about 6 months to actually really learn and understand, wrap my head around. So we have the father of homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann, with these concepts that had been dancing around within, the human race. But he took the idea, his first remedy that sort of sparked this whole study of medicine was a remedy called cinchona. And it's where we get cinchona bark is where we get quinine from, that's known to treat the symptoms of malaria. But when he was translating some literature, the author he was translating from made mention of the fact that it likely worked for malaria because it was a bitter herb. And he rejected that straight out because there's lots of bitter herbs. And the other bitter herbs don't affect malaria. So how could it just be that this was a bitter herb? There had to be something more to it. So he ended up taking some, and we will consider Hahnemann a healthy test subject. He took some cinchona, some of the bark, and he developed the symptoms of malaria. And in his incredible genius mind, a connection formed, and he went, I wonder if this is a novel thing just with this cinchona bark here, or did I just put two and two together and come up with something that could be really important for humans? Well, it turns out he did put two and two together, And it turns out there's just about every substance on our planet, especially those that in their full non-diluted form are considered toxic, right? These are particularly powerful medicines once they're diluted and potentized. And the whole concept is like cures like. So a substance, give it to a healthy person, you get a whole list of symptoms, get a sick person in with those symptoms, give them that remedy that can cause those symptoms in a healthy person. And somehow, and this is a mechanism nobody can explain yet, but somehow that stimulates that body to heal and the symptoms go away. And I've used it for 20 years in incredible, amazing success stories for very ill people. But Hahnemann was not just about homeopathy and potentized remedies. Hahnemann was also about something called good hygiene. And in fact, in one of the books that he wrote, The Organon, he wrote an entire paragraph, also known as a aphorism or a chapter. He wrote an entire chapter about the idea that before a doctor should diagnose an illness, especially a chronic illness in someone, their responsibility was to make sure that the person was living a type of lifestyle that creates health instead of creates disease. And this includes food and drink and exercise and sleep and the mind, the state of the mind and its effect on the body and the environment. And I won't go into all the details that he does in that chapter, but he makes it very clear that if a physician has not addressed these basic foundations of health with their patient, and the patient has symptoms, you cannot call that a chronic disease until you've corrected those things. And this is at a time, an era when he lived, when his more allopathic-minded colleagues didn't give enough weight to the impact of what we eat, drink, how we sleep, how we move, the environment we live in, to the formation of imbalance in the body and then the subsequent expression of symptoms. Dr. Jim Sensenig taught for his entire career that symptoms are really just the outward expression of the body trying to heal itself. And he'll be the first one to say, well, I didn't come up with that. Right? That was from Lindlar and Leuston, Hahnemann and Priesnitz and Knipe and all of these forefathers. And also there were women in there too. They're the ones who made this very clear, right? Your body exhibits symptoms, and mainstream would say, oh, you have those symptoms because you have this disease. And in naturopathic medicine, in the practice of homeopathy, and in many other ancient healing modalities that way predate allopathy, practitioners and healers and medicine people know that those symptoms are simply a representation of the body trying to heal itself. And our job is to recognize those symptoms and assist the body in healing itself. So, having said all that, here we have Hahnemann, we have homeopathy, we have people who are deciding not to vaccinate. And, you know, my practice, a bulk of my practice was working with families who had at least one child on the spectrum and they didn't want to vaccinate their other children. They stopped vaccinating that child. They didn't want to vaccinate themselves. And they came to me to say, well, what else can we do? Especially if there was cases of measles popping up or chicken pox or, you know, whooping cough or whatever. What else can we do? And so, you know, I wrote the book, The Unvaccinated Child, and the first 3 or 4 chapters are devoted to what do you do? Well, you create health in yourself and in your children. And that's the first line of defense, not just for acute illness and infectious illness, but for health, period, for being able to recover from health, for being able to put your body into that healthy enough state for you to heal for your body to be able to heal itself. And so what is that? That has to do with what do you feed people in your sphere of life? And how do you strengthen their immune system? And what kind of sleep do they need? And what should they be taking in? What kind of nutrients do we need to thrive? Like if you garden or you just simply can observe a tree or any animal out there in the world, you know that they need certain things or they die. They get sick and they die. Well, humans are the same way. There's certain things we need or we get sick and die. Or we get sick and then the miracle of modern medicine keeps us alive as long as it possibly can because we've become a source of revenue, right? When we are sick enough, but not sick enough to die, we are worth money to a pharmaceutical company. And I hate to say it like that, but it's true. I'm going to say it again. When we're sick enough, but not so sick that we're going to die like tomorrow, we've now become a valuable commodity because we can be given things that we're led to believe are the only things that will keep us alive. And this is a very, very sad thing happening in human society right now. But it won't always be like this. It might be my whole life. But I certainly hope that when my children are grown, they see something different. And we can see it different beliefs in other countries and other cultures. So it's very predominant in the American culture right now. I believe the United Kingdom also has this sort of veil in front of their eyes, and a number of other countries, but it's certainly not the whole planet. So you make the choice. I know I'm rambling a little bit. It's a rainy Saturday morning and everybody's at the farmer's market, and I'm just going to have fun with this episode, so bear with me. So you make the decision, you're not going to vaccinate. Now what do you do? One, I really encourage you to get a copy of my book. It's not very expensive. It'll be a book you use constantly all the time. Promise you. Especially if you have kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews, or you work with children. It is a very valuable treatment guide. It's a handbook that will help you through this. Second, pay attention to hygiene, not hygiene as in personal cleanliness, but hygiene as in the cleanliness of your lifestyle. Quit feeding the people you love and yourself sugary items, processed food. It's dead food. Even when they say, oh, we've added vitamins and minerals to it, there's other things, enzymes and phytonutrients and a living force within living food that when we consume it, it becomes part of us. And we need that to be healthy. So food, drink, water is sufficient. You know, if you want to squeeze a little bit of fresh juice into the water, that's great. I really like squeezing lemon or limes or grapefruit into water for a little bit of taste. You can plant a little stevia plant if you want, throw a leaf in there. You can grow that. You can grow that everywhere. You can grow in a pot inside. And one leaf is plenty of sweetness for quite a bit of liquid. And it's very different from the stevia-based products that you buy, which are super concentrated, and they have other things added into it. So the herbal teas are great. Lemon balm is one of my favorite teas. It's good adaptogen. It balances immune function. It's good for the thyroid and the adrenals, and it has a very pleasant, slightly lemony taste, not overbearing. You have to know that lemony taste should be there often to pick it up. And you throw in some rose hips and hibiscus and astragalus, and there's oat straw. There's all kinds of herbs that you can throw together. You can drink it hot. You can drink it cold and iced. If you really like to have some sweetener, use raw honey, a little bit of raw honey. You could use a little bit of maple syrup. Use a teeny tiny bit of molasses. There's so many ways that you can add sweetness to things without turning to sugar, which is an immune depressant, and it's an inflammatory. So processed foods, all that stuff I mentioned, you don't want to overdo it on on starchy carbohydrates. We have to have carbohydrates. And I know all of the folks out there who subscribe to this idea that carbohydrates are bad for you. And you say, I even eat 10 grams of carbohydrates and I start to gain weight. Well, there's other things to look at. It's not, you have to have carbohydrates to burn the fat in your body. So complex carbs are best, a good balance of fat, protein, and carbs. This is going to be a really big step in the right direction. Making sure that all the minerals are present, because our soil becomes increasingly deficient, especially in trace minerals, some more than others, depending on where you're at in the country. So a really good trace mineral blend, liquid or capsule or tablet, is really good. A lot of folks are drinking RO, reverse osmosis water. And when that happens, it takes almost all the minerals out. So you need to remineralize, especially if you do that. Making sure that your bowels are moving and you're urinating. If you drink enough water, you're going to urinate. Of course, there's cautions if you're taking some kind of medicine where you're supposed to restrict your fluid intake. Don't take what I say and go against your doctor, but do evaluate who your doctor is, and are they helping you build health, or are they stringing you along as a pharmaceutical customer? And you just ask yourself, because no matter how old you are, how young you are, and everything in between, your body has the ability to heal itself. So I know the title of this episode, Homeoprophylaxis, probably caught your attention. You're probably thinking, man, Eli, you're just droning on and on. Let's get to the homeoprophylaxis. So what is it? It is the use of potentized medicines, just like we do, right? When we say, oh, I practice homeopathy, that's what homeopaths use. The potentized medicines in a very specific way. And we use them in homeoprophylaxis to prevent or mitigate the occurrence of infectious disease. People use them in place of, right, getting vaccinated. And I'm not even remotely going to say to you that in the United States, especially Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and a number of other countries, mainstream medicine will not accept that homeoprophylaxis can be a substitute for vaccination, because many doctors get in trouble when they say that. So I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say that we can look at the clinical results of doing this. And I'm going to tell you about 2 studies that were done on a countrywide level with millions of people, and tell you what happened. And you can go find lots more, especially the work of Dr. Isaac Golden. He's collected a lot of evidence, historical evidence. Dr. Andre Sane has collected and written about a lot of historical evidence and trials, and what were the results of doctors using remedies, potentized medicine, to do this, to prevent or mitigate the occurrence of infectious diseases. Now, although it is frequently used by people who have made the decision to not vaccinate, it's also becoming more and more widespread in its use among people who used to vaccinate or who still vaccinate because they want an extra level of protection. And even though, it's unfortunate, right? The practice is not recognized as vaccination immunization in most developed nations, but because it's so effective, it's widely accepted in many other countries as a first-line approach to controlling outbreaks and epidemics. And it's especially accepted in countries where the pharmaceutical industry does not have a chokehold on the medical training, research, and the general market. It's interesting, right? Where it's being used and where it's being embraced and where it's not. So I mentioned Dr. Isaac Golden. He did a thesis in 2004, his graduate thesis, and part of that was to accumulate historical evidence for the use for homeoprophylaxis. And I'm not going to read it to you. I have an entire presentation that I did on this. And in the show notes, we'll put a link to that if you want to purchase it. All proceeds go to Long Shadows Ranch, where we fund our teaching and training of people on how to live sustainable lives, how to grow food, hunt food, preserve food, and everything in between, and make money at it. But needless to say, Dr. Golden found a lot of evidence starting back in 1848, because, you know, homeopathy, it's only been around a couple hundred years, well, more than 200 years now, where great practitioners, very good prescribers, and even Hahnemann himself talked about using particular remedies to not only treat, but to prevent. So they would give it to people before there were symptoms. That's prophylaxis. And in this case, homeoprophylaxis, because we're using potentized medicine, to prevent or mitigate. Mitigate means so it's not as bad as it would have been. And people like Boninghausen and Burnett and Kent, and who else did he follow? Sankaran and Close and Shepard and Blackie and Mather and Lassell and Hahnemann. Andre Sain has written a lot about this as well. And these were for things like cholera and typhoid fever and scarlet fever and smallpox. And the interesting thing is that the homeopaths' rate of cure and prevention was sometimes 10 times greater than their allopathic counterparts, who would lose people to death, because of the treatment, or their treatments simply weren't acceptable, but it weakened the patient so much they died from the disease that they didn't need to die from. And so there is historical evidence in the classical homeopathic literature. And then here's two studies I want to tell you about that were done in modern day. So one was done in 2007, I think it was, in Cuba, and one in India in 2005, 2006. And I'm sure stuff has been done since then, but I haven't looked for any recent trials because, you know, well, because I'm raising chickens and ducks and bees, and I already know this works, but I'm going to share these two studies with you. So Cuba, back in 2007, so in Cuba, there's a condition called leptospirosis. And it can be devastating when there's leptospirosis infections and running rampant through the country. And so they decided to test homeoprophylaxis with 2.3 million people that they treated, and they left 8.8 million people untreated. You with me? So over 10 million people, they divided them up. They took a smaller group, right about a quarter of the population. They gave them a homeopathic remedy, and they left the other people untreated. This was their test. What happened? So the untreated group had an increase of over 22% from the previous year in leptospirosis cases. So they were untreated, they got leptospirosis. It was at a greater rate, 22% more cases of leptospirosis. And what happened in the group that got the homeoprophylaxis, there was an 84% decrease. This was stunning to the homeopaths, to the world, because it was an incredibly large scale experiment, trial. And now what do? Is they use homeopathy countrywide to help control the occurrence of leptospirosis in Cuba. That should have been enough for the whole world to say, whoa, okay, let's get these homeopaths together and find out what we can do about basic, childhood illness and disease and epidemics and pandemics, which I'm going to mention because many of you might be wondering, well, what happened during COVID, Eli? I'm going to tell you in my practice what happened and in the practices of many homeopaths what happened. But let's first talk about India, in Kerala, India. So there's this fever, and I know I'm not saying this right. And someday I think one of my Indian friends will say, "Hey Eli, this is how you actually say it," but it's chikungunya fever. Not typically fatal, although you can get very sick from this particular fever. But in 2005, 2006, people began dying from the fever. So now it's a problem, right? Instead of just having a whole bunch of really sick people, now we have people who are getting really sick and they're dying. And so they took a group of people, it was much smaller than the Cuba study. It was over 1,600 people. And they gave 1,000 of them a remedy, and they gave 500 no remedy. So what happened? Well, in the group that got the remedy, there was an 82% prevention rate. And in the untreated group, 76% of them contracted the illness. There's a lot of people. I mean, the Cuba study was incredible amounts of people, and the results were very clear. I mean, you don't even have to run statistics when you get results like that. They did, but you don't have to run it and get a statistical significance number because it's clear and obvious to even someone who's not trained in doing scientific research that substance made a difference. And did they control for everything? No. But when you have numbers that big and such a dramatic difference, it doesn't really matter what the other factors were so much, especially when people are spread out all over a country. So it doesn't matter what they were eating, and it doesn't matter how much sleep they were getting, and it doesn't matter if some of them were taking, vitamin C, or if some of them were using another herb. It doesn't matter because the numbers are so big. We know that it was the remedy that played the largest role in getting those success numbers. What about my experience with homeoprophylaxis? So 20 years, and I've been using it for most of that time. I started very early on in practice because one of my first patients was on the spectrum. And I didn't learn a lot about vaccination in school, just what you were supposed to do. I hadn't really been exposed to a lot of the old time naturopaths until I got out of school. And then I found literature and I started learning from the elder naturopaths who were still in practice, and learned that our forebearers are people who came before us in our medicine. And naturopathic medicine was an accumulation of homeopaths, physical medicine like the osteopath, well, the chiropractors and the bone setters from Europe, and herbalists, the eclectic herbalists, and other people using natural ways of stimulating the body, assisting the body to heal itself. And they did not believe in injecting or doing surgery if it was not needed and all of this other stuff. But when I first got out of school, I didn't know all that. And what did I think? Well, here's a childhood vaccination schedule, which I was watching go up and up and up and up and thinking, this can't be right. It didn't feel right. But then one of my first patients was on the spectrum, and I got to see video footage of before and after. And long story short, we did really good work with that child. He recovered. And my practice filled up, and I just kept hearing these stories over and over, and these people coming in say we don't want to vaccinate. In a very short period of time within that first year, as I started doing more research and reading and learning, I went from being, the basic doctor who just does the childhood vaccination schedule and the vaccinating of adults and whatever, to the doctor who said, this is a crime. What's happening is a crime. And especially because there's other ways to deal with this. And so I started learning about homeoprophylaxis, along with all of the basics. How do you build health, maintain health? How do you make sure, that your child's body and your body is able to deal with infectious disease, and in kids' sake, childhood illnesses, all that stuff. And so I learned about homeoprophylaxis. And there are, a set number of childhood illnesses we really worry about, like certain kinds of pneumonia, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, rotavirus, measles, rubella, tuberculosis, influenza, smallpox, chickenpox, polio, meningitis, and mumps. And of course now COVID, even though COVID doesn't usually affect children in the same way, probably because they're not as deficient in vitamin A and vitamin D as adults are. But regardless, I learned how to do it. And I learned where to get the remedies. And sometimes it's using something called a nosode. And for some of these, it's not the nosode, because always and historically what folks found when they went looking is there was usually a remedy, and they called it the genius epidemicus. There was usually a remedy for these epidemics and outbreaks that covered the symptom picture of the ill people. It's still homeopathy, but what they found were there was a symptom picture that was very common, and that remedy seemed to be the remedy that would not only treat it or treat the person and then that they would get better, but it would help prevent it from showing up in other people. So I say now for 20 years, this is what I've used. I've had incredible success in all that time. And I'm not going to knock on wood because I don't think it's luck at all. I've seen it enough times, thousands of times. I haven't lost a child to a childhood illness. I lost no patients during COVID with treatment. And yes, I used homeoprophylaxis along with vitamin D and vitamin A and vitamin C and other things, right, with the diet. And if there's a fever, we fasted the diet and we did hydrotherapy, especially constitutional hydrotherapy for people who did get symptoms. But in my realm, the people's symptoms were much more mild, and there was rare instances of long-term COVID. And so that's what I use. I still use that. And I also have a seasonal remedy for flu. So in addition to the childhood illness prophylaxis, it's a seasonal remedy for flu. I got a bottle of potentized medicine from a guy named Dr. Bill Mitchell, who got it from Dr. John Bastyr. And Dr. Bill told me that it contained flu strains from as early as the 1918 flu. And every year, whoever has had this formula would add the most recent strain. Sometimes other things were added. If there was a genius epidemicus for the flu, that would get added into it. So, I don't really know all the remedies necessarily that were in there by the time I got it. I know what I've put into it, which has been the flu strain of the previous year and the predictive flu strain that's done by the group in France, where they change conditions and they predict how the flu is going to mutate, and then that gets sent out to use for the current flu season. And it's not that nobody gets the flu, but the flu that they get is mild and short-lived as compared to 2 weeks or 3 weeks or development of pneumonia. There are many, many people who just simply don't get the symptoms of the flu, and they don't get any of the side effects of the flu vaccine. Because remember, my population of people have made that choice to either stop vaccinating or they don't vaccinate at all. So how do you do it? So because this is a public podcast, I'm not going to go into those details, but it is basically getting the right nosode, dosing it for a certain amount of time, then waiting a certain amount of time. And there's other kinds of rules in there. Like if someone takes one of these remedies and they get the symptoms of the childhood illness, that means it was latent within them, and you have to wait till that clears out. And sometimes they get stuck in that pattern, even though it's not very severe. and they need an individualized homeopathic prescription to get them over that. I go over that in the webinar I did that for practitioners and for people trying to be their own best doctor. Where do you get the remedies from? Unfortunately, today, it's very difficult to get some of those remedies, but there are doctors who carry them in their office, and they will sell them to you because they can. It's just the big companies, COVID scared a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and things were really crazy for a long time. And so there's been a bit of a crackdown. I'm hoping that that's lightening up over the years to come. So it can be a little challenging to get them, but you can get them. It's not like it's illegal to buy them. It's just people stopped selling them. And you just put together a little kit. Not only do I have kids do it, but I have adults who stopped getting their boosters. I have adults who were vaccinated as children go through it. It can also, in some cases, seem to clear vaccine damage from particular, vaccines that were given. But there's a lot of other stuff in vaccines that should be dealt with if you suspect vaccine damage. So there's a few things if you are giving the homeoprophylaxis. I'm going to mention these two particular ones because it happens frequently enough that I tell all of my people about it. And that is, if you're taking the homeopathic for rotavirus, which is rota, right? It's potentized rota. If you take that and you develop bloody stools, or your child develops bloody stools, this tells us this, we know you were exposed at some point, which most of us have been, and it sort of just sat in there. Your body was able to deal with it. It didn't multiply and create, the symptoms of rota infection. And the remedy seems to stimulate your body to get rid of that. So sometimes there's a few days of some bloody stools, but it passes usually. If it doesn't, you need a homeopathic remedy that's individualized. And there's a number of remedies that can be used. That I don't usually have to do. Usually it passes. But again, in my patient population, I'm creating health in them from multiple angles. I'm not just using homeopathic remedy, right? I'm doing the whole shebang with people. Let's get your body healthy enough that it can heal. And in some cases, many of these kids probably wouldn't even need a homeopathic remedy for many of these childhood illnesses. They might be down for a day or two, and then they've acquired natural immunity. So, and how do we know that? Well, because in a number of them, you can check titers, not in everybody. And this is one of the problems mainstream has, is that you might get titers in some people, but not other people. And yet, those people, even without titers, can be exposed and not contract the illness. So that just tells us how much we still don't know about the body, about the human body. The other one that I mention is when you're doing for smallpox or chicken pox, variolinum or varicella. So I've seen, it's not uncommon to see a mild rash break out over the body, little, what looks like very mild chicken pox, not usually itchy, although it can be, but not usually. And they usually clear up in a day or two. I always say when you've given a remedy, when you're doing homeoprophylaxis, if a fever pops up, do not suppress it. We're not suppress it anyway. That is a symptom of healing. And if you suppress it, you're working against the body. And I know that there's folks out there, I'm in a lot of groups where, I make a post like 102, don't suppress that fever, support the body through it. And, I get wildly attacked for being a dangerous person, but I've treated adults and children even up into 100, 405. And it just means there's something really wicked going on. The body's got to superheat itself. Do we see seizures? Sometimes, but usually febrile seizures happen when there's a rapid change between temperatures. So it's those two remedies in particular. For rota, a little bit of bloody diarrhea, it usually passes. And for chicken pox, you may get a mild non-itchy rash, that usually passes. If children get a childhood illness and you haven't used homeoprophylaxis, you haven't vaccinated, really think about having someone you can call, like a naturopathic doctor who practices homeopathy, or a homeopath, because they're invaluable in clearing those symptoms out really fast. And this is, what I've seen over the last 20 years. So the rest of that webinar that I did talked about homeopathic heavy metal detox, and it was full of resources and places where you can go and find the remedies and all of that stuff. But I hope that that clarifies what this term homeoprophylaxis is, that there's more to the story than just giving somebody something, that you have to also address their core and basic health. And I hope everybody has a great day. I hope, I'm sending good healing energy your way to help assist your body in its attempts to heal itself. And I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye. Thanks for joining me today. For those of you who have written and emailed and are interested in my books and other offerings, I wrote The Unvaccinated Child as a resource guide for parents and caregivers to navigate childhood illnesses in a natural and healthy way. And while the intended group was the unvaccinated, it turns out it's an important resource for the vaccinated kids as well, since vaccines do not necessarily prevent illness. Smoke Rings is another book I wrote, and that's to help smokers support their health, regardless if they plan to quit or not. So for people who smoke, love a smoker, used to smoke, continue to smoke, this book helps you be your healthiest version. And when I say it is judgment-free, it is absolutely judgment-free. You're free to make the choices you make. I'd just like you to find better health while you make those choices. My most recent book, Homeopathy, A Foundational Approach, is really great for someone, whether they're a complete beginner or they've already been practicing homeopathy. It starts at the beginning and it guides the readers through the basics and on into first aid and acute practice, so you can start using homeopathy right away. That's the most important thing to me, is to get folks using homeopathy in their everyday life. My workshops and courses can be found at either ecampnd.com or longshadowsranch.net. Have a great week. Again, thanks for joining me, and thanks for your support.